nearly 3 years in federal prison for tax evasion, Ron Isley is finally speaking out about his time behind.
You know, and we went to court for so many years, and we won that.
They gave us soundtracks for weddings, breakups, and block parties. But behind the harmonies was a family story that's anything but smooth. From building the Isley Brothers' legacy as a tight-knit trio, to courtroom battles over the name, the money, and who really kept the lights on. From Chris Jasper and Ernie walking out in the 80s, to Rudolph suing his own brother in federal court, and Ronald catching hands from the IRS harder than any beat drop. This isn't just a family feud. It's a full-blown unraveling of one of music's most iconic brands. Layer by layer, lawsuit by lawsuit. Let's get into it.
You know I got it. Hey.
Things got real messy in the Isley family when Rudolph took Ronald to court over something nobody saw coming. The actual name, the Isley Brothers. Yup, the iconic brand they built together was suddenly up for debate, and Rudolph was not playing nice. Apparently, Ronald went behind his brother's back and filed paperwork to lock down the group's name, all by himself. No heads up, no conversation, just his name on the official documents. And the government said cool, stamped it, and handed Ronald full control. That move? Yeah, it didn't sit right with Rudolph.
My brother Rudolph, he decided to go into his ministry. So basically, it's just me and Ernie now.
See, way back when, it was the three of them, Rudolph, Ronald, and their brother O'Kelly, putting in equal work. Same money in, same money out, and equal say in the name they built from scratch. So when Ronald decided to keep the whole thing for himself, Rudolph called foul, major foul. He dragged the situation to federal court and basically said, hold up, if we've been sharing this for decades, you don't get to switch up now. He wanted the judge to say they both owned the name 50-50, and if Ronald had already been making money off it, he wanted his cut too.
And we went to court for so many years, and we won that.
The real kicker? Rudolph claimed that even after O'Kelly passed, it was always understood the group name was still a family thing, not a solo hustle. So watching his own brother scoop it all up like a solo project, that was the final straw. Ronald wasn't about to let this lawsuit slide without clapping back. He tried to get the whole thing tossed out, claiming that whatever partnership they had ended when their brother O'Kelly passed, and that Rudolph had clocked out back in the late 80s. His legal team was basically like, look, Ronald's the only one actually doing anything with the name these days. He's on stage, dropping music, putting in work. Rudolph? Retired and watching from the sidelines, but the judge wasn't buying it. Instead of shutting the case down, he said, nah, there's more to unpack here, especially when family, legacy, and music trademarks are all tangled together. So now it's going full steam ahead, with both sides digging up receipts in discovery. And if nobody backs down, it's headed to trial. Rudolph, meanwhile, wasn't letting the retired label erase his contributions. Just because he wasn't singing didn't mean he vanished. He pointed out that he'd been handling business behind the scenes, like working on a major publishing deal and being involved in licensing their classic hit Shout for a Super Bowl ad. In his eyes, that meant he never really stepped away from the brand. Ronald's crew pushed back hard. They said Ronald wasn't trying to hijack anything. He just built a company for his own music stuff. Any Isley merch out there? According to them, it was either tied to Ronald and Ernie's current projects or floating around from unauthorized sellers who had nothing to do with Ronald. Basically, they painted Rudolph as someone trying to cash in on a brand he hadn't touched in years. Now it's messy, personal, and deep. Two brothers, one legendary name, and a courtroom deciding who gets to own the legacy. The money talk made things even messier. Ronald's team claimed everything was fair. Sound Exchange had been cutting equal checks to both brothers for digital royalties. So in their eyes, there was no shady business. But Rudolph's side said that's just one stream of cash. The bigger issue? All the licensing deals, merch sales, and performances going down under the Isley Brothers name, with zero transparency and no cut for him. And just when you thought it couldn't get more tangled, Ronald's crew hit back with a new angle. They argued the name shouldn't be split between just two people anyway, since the group wasn't always a duo. They brought up other contributors like Ernie, trying to paint the picture that the ownership wasn't as clean-cut as Rudolph was making it seem. But Rudolph wasn't budging. To him, the whole legacy came from the original trio, him, Ronald, and their late brother O'Kelly. So when O'Kelly passed, the name should have naturally belonged to the two left standing. That was the unspoken deal. Ronald filing solo for the trademark? That felt like a betrayal, like erasing decades of shared history and snatching the keys to the empire they built together. Now the whole thing is heading to court with no peace offering in sight, and unless they squash it privately, it's going to be up to a jury to figure out who really owns the Isley name. What started as a legendary brother act might end as a full-blown fallout, less about harmony, more about who gets the last word on stage and on paper. But if you thought this was the first time Ronald clashed with family over control, think again. There has always been tension, power plays, and family drama with these guys, long before lawyers ever got involved. What's going down now between Ronald and Rudolph wasn't new. It was just the latest fallout from a story that's always been messy under the surface. Back in the day, it wasn't just Ronald, Rudolph, and their late brother O'Kelly running things anymore. As the sound evolved, the younger blood, Ernie, Marvin, and their brother-in-law, Chris Jasper, stepped in and basically carried the band through the funk and rock era. They weren't just background players. Ernie's guitar, Marvin's bass, and Chris's keys shaped some of their biggest tracks. But while they were grinding behind the scenes, the older brothers still called all the shots and soaked up the spotlight. That gap got too wide. So in the mid-80s, Ernie, Marvin, and Chris bounced. They started their own group, Isley Jasper Isley, not just to experiment musically, but to finally get the credit they felt they deserved. It was low-key rebellion in harmonies and bass lines. Their first album didn't exactly shake the charts, but it made a point. They weren't just sidekicks. Then they dropped Caravan of Love, and boom, won on the R&B chart. Chris wrote and sang it, and it hit big enough to get covered overseas. Still, the glow didn't last long. Within a few years, the group fizzled. Ernie dipped, Chris went solo, and started his own socially conscious label. And Marvin eventually circled back to the Isley name before health issues took him out of the game. But that split? It wasn't just about music. It was about the exact same stuff that's now blowing up in court: credit, control, and who gets to own what. The fight playing out between Ronald and Rudolph today? It's giving deja vu. Rudolph's out here saying Ronald pulled a fast one by trademarking the name on his own, that it was always meant to be shared between them after O'Kelly passed. That Ronald cutting him out wasn't just shady, it was personal. And when you look back at how Ernie, Marvin, and Chris felt back then, like they were doing all the work but being treated like extras, it's the same energy. At the end of the day, this wasn't just about a name on a piece of paper. It was about years of people feeling like they helped build something legendary and got pushed to the side. So yeah, the legal language might be fresh, but the real story? Same old beat. A family, a legacy, and a whole lot of unresolved tension wrapped in harmony. And while family tension was old news, Ronald's next opponent didn't share his last name. It was the IRS.
After spending nearly 3 years in federal prison for tax evasion, Ron Isley is finally speaking out about his time behind.
So while Ron was out here building a legendary music legacy, the IRS was stacking receipts like mixtapes, waiting for him to slip. And oh, he did. This wasn't just a one-time whoop situation either. Dude had been dodging tax responsibilities for years, even after filing for bankruptcy twice. You'd think that would be a wake-up call, but nope. He just kept skipping returns like they were optional. Between the late 90s and early 2000s, things got real. He missed return after return, ducked payments, and eventually got hit with a full-blown criminal case. The IRS passed his file to the Department of Justice, and next thing you know, he was sentenced to nearly 3 years behind bars, followed by a strict probation plan that basically told him, don't mess this up again. After he got out, the IRS wasn't done. They hit him with more liens and levies, trying to get their money. Ronald tried to wiggle out of it with an offer in compromise, a fancy way of saying, I can't pay all this, but here's a smaller check, can we call it even? At first, the IRS seemed like they might go for it, but then their legal team was like, hold up. Turns out, because Ronald's tax mess had already been part of a DOJ case, the IRS couldn't just say yes without looping in the feds. And not only did Ronald skip that step, he also didn't exactly come clean with his finances. Left stuff out, didn't file all his new taxes, and lowballed what he could pay. Basically, his offer wasn't adding up at all. He tried to push back in court, saying that rule about DOJ approval only applied while he was on trial, and since he was already sentenced, it shouldn't count. He also argued that nobody from the DOJ or his probation team had said no. So why was the IRS acting like it was blocked?
The court saw it differently. They said once the DOJ gets involved, the IRS can't make solo moves anymore. If Ronald wanted that deal to go through, they needed to get DOJ approval. End of story. And even without that rule, the court still agreed the IRS was right to shut him down. He hadn't cleaned up his act, didn't show honest numbers, and wasn't following basic tax rules, so why would they trust him with a deal? Bottom line, Ronald had chances, he just kept fumbling them. For a man who built a whole empire on smooth moves and soulful harmonies, his handling of the money side was chaotic at best. And this time, the feds hit a higher note.